Hegseth starts calling people Pharisees, like the media and senators who don't agree with him. What does he mean by Pharisee, and why is that such a dangerous term, even if he doesn't think it is? Well, we're going to talk in this in-between episode to Dr. Jeffrey Garcia, who is a fellow for the center. He's on our advisory board, and he's a specialist in first century Judaism and Christianity. And so we're going to talk about exactly what is going on with Pharisees and why even pastors and teachers and people who talk about Pharisees in the church need to understand they were not the bad guys. Stay tuned. Just to remind everybody, what are your qualifications for talking about Pharisees again?
My work academically is on ancient Judaism and the New Testament, and most of my writing is on ancient Judaism and the Gospels. So I have a fairly good understanding of who the Pharisees were, and I recently did a paper on the Pharisee portrayal in The Chosen for the last annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature.
Oh, yeah. I bet that was a fun section. Was it on film, TV, and portrayals and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it was specifically, it was film in the Bible, but specifically with attention to The Chosen.
Yeah. And we talked about that once. So if you want to hear all of his hot and cold takes on how the Pharisees are portrayed in The Chosen, you can go listen to that episode. For now, we want to talk about something that our Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, said last week. And not so much to dog on him, but I think what he says is just very representative of how a lot of Christians think about the Pharisees. So it's worth listening to what he's doing here and then talking about what's problematic here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play and we can watch. This is the senator from Nevada, Jackie Rosen, I think is her name, who is questioning Pete Hegseth here. So she's going to talk for a little bit and then he's going to say what he thinks about using the term Pharisee.
You keep doubling down on this phrase, Mr. Secretary. You compare journalists, you compare us, you compare so many to Pharisees. Pharisees. It's a problematic and historically weaponized term that casts Jewish communities as hypocritical or morally corrupt. You doubled down again and said it. Words matter. Words matter. What you choose to say, how we choose to say it. How do you justify using this language as Secretary of Defense? Words matter. It's a historically hurtful term. Why do you continue to use it? And what actions are you taking to prevent rhetoric like this from permeating throughout the department that is going to target specific groups or individuals of people based on their religion?
Senator, I feel like it's a pretty accurate term for folks who don't see the plank in their own eye and always want to see what's wrong with an operation as opposed to the historic success of preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. So I stand by it.
You stand by calling people Pharisees. Sir, I cannot stand for that. That is wrong. It is not respectful to people. And I expect anyone who is in leadership in our country to be respectful and use respectful terms and not be an anti-Semite.
So she pulled out the big anti-Semitic term there at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, what is she referring to, do you think, when she says this is a historically, I don't know if she said abusive term, it's a problematic term historically. What's she talking about there?
Yeah, I mean, I think what she's referring to is the use of the term Pharisee to paint all Jews with a very broad brush. Historically, this is what eventually leads to the slur Christ killer that has been used for the Jewish people. And the Pharisees become that entry point into that conversation. And that term, it has yet to be dealt with seriously, I think, more importantly at a church level. Like, there's been serious engagement scholarly wise, but that doesn't always make it down to, the layperson. And there's a lot of work to do in that, but I think that's what she's referring to.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. Yeah, I mean, let's just dissect a little bit of what he says here. Is anybody who can't see the plank in their own eyes, Pharisee is the right term. Can we just talk about, like, biblically New Testament, why that sentence doesn't even make sense?
I mean, for how he's using it, it doesn't make sense. I mean, he's comparing it to a war operation, and he's speaking about. I mean, this is also used at a press conference that he had recently, where he called the core reporters Pharisees, and then brought up another text, the man with the withered hand, and the plot of the Pharisees at the end of that text to go against Jesus, which. Actually, today I was looking at it again, and the translations have already a sort of position against the Pharisees. So it's translated almost antagonistically because that's for a long time where Christian tradition has stood and still is. It's interesting because the phrase, the whole looking at the plank, in your own eye is the whole hypocrite thing. Right. Like you're looking at someone else, but not dealing with your own stuff, which feels very sort of like almost projecting. He's sort of projecting the position. And again, it's a misunderstanding of the ancient context. And like I tell my students often, this is very much where we need to return to the idea that the Bible was written for us, but not to us. And how do we do that and are careful with not painting with a broad brush so that we're leaning somewhere between anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic?
Yeah. And I mean, so in the original context of that phrase, the plank in your own eye, it's how can you look at the speck in your brother's eye? It's actually in all Hebrews, the way. And the Pharisees are interesting for a lot of reasons in their interactions with Jesus. But I guess I always try to think of like a modern analogy. It's almost like, if a Protestant was arguing with a Catholic or somebody who was Catholic adjacent or something, like you already agree on a lot of things, but you really need to make this final turn in order, to see it the other person's way. So I wonder, when we say, here's the phrase I hear. Pharisee means hypocrite. It means you just make up rules. And you make up rules for the sake of making up rules because you like to be in control and powerful. Maybe we can deal with that making up rules part. Like why are they accused of making up rules?
I mean, it's interesting. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have what we believe is a critique of the Pharisees, where they're called the seekers move things. Which apparently is a critique that suggests that they found ways out of being as observant as they should have been. And this is a common intra-Jewish commentary on other groups, because a group often needs to define themselves in contrast to another group.
Right.
So we're not like them because of A, B, and C. With the Pharisees, it seems like when Jesus engages them, there's something about his teaching that resonates with them. He just usually takes a position that the current group that he's talking to is not really pro, even though the New Testament is only giving us a small window into a much, much larger conversation, right? And there are many things that whichever Pharisee Jesus interacts with, they have a great deal in common. We're just getting a conversation that is limited to this particular topic. As you said, Catholic Protestant would probably be a good cognate relative to what's happening.
Yeah, it's difficult to think of because we're not on the ground with the Pharisees next to us. How they're processing things. You think everything Jesus says they're going to go along with in some way, or most of it. And at some point, it's going to go adverse to what they think about something. But that's not just true of the Pharisees. That's true of every single group that Jesus encounters, including his own
Absolutely.
To chastise.
Absolutely.
Right? So
correct.
The Pharisees aren't really different from anybody who they have all kinds of unmet expectations or ways in which Jesus confuses them. They're not really different than disciples. What do you, like, if you were to, how do you put the Sadducees on the spectrum here between Pharisees and Sadducees? Because I think the Sadducees actually are people who are fundamentally opposed to what Jesus is doing.
Yes. Yeah, the Sadducees, we usually put them among the elite priests. I think Luke describes them as the elite priests and does this whole elite leaders of the people that are turning against Jesus. And they're really the ones that Jesus is a threat to. He critiques them in similar ways that some Pharisees critique the priests. They are the ones that we know from historical sources and archaeological sources are the ones that are corrupt and making money off the backs of their fellow Jewish people. So the Pharisees weren't friends to them mostly as much as Jesus and his movement wasn't a friend to them. And they're really the ones that set out to sort of get rid of Jesus because of his popularity. And I would also say that the places where Jesus and the Pharisees disagree, there is a sense that there is also he's popular among the Pharisees, right? Because they're always asking questions and always coming after him. And I often have told my students if they really disliked him or hated him, I mean, think about in your life, if you dislike someone or hate them, how often do you want to be around them asking them questions? Probably not much. So it's a sign of some kind of popularity. Even if they disagree, there's a popularity, maybe even a celebrity there that is happening among the Pharisees with Jesus. He's definitely saying things that resonate with them, and then sort of bring forward questions that they want to know, even if when he answers, they disagree on his particular approach.
Yeah, and certainly there are going to be people amongst the Pharisees, like there would be amongst any other group, who are really hostile to him and are
Absolutely.
trying to debunk him and dethrone him in some way. So that's I don't think you have to throw that idea out either. Let's go back before we wrap this up. Is it wrong to make rules about how to live? Does that actually go against the gospel?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I would say just to go back to what you said previously, the big problem is also making the Pharisee one thing, right?
Right.
So we presume that within the Pharisees, they are similar to denominations that are very large. You know, you go to, like, let's say the Assemblies of God is one of the largest evangelical denominations. If you went to every one church that was AG, they probably have different opinions about different things, right? But they'd all be Assemblies of God, and they'd all agree on specific, big things. With the Pharisees in terms, within the Gospels making rules, I've often used this descriptor as for my students to sort of get this conversation going when we're talking about ancient Judaism and Jesus. When someone comes to faith, they go to a church, they come to faith. The language that evangelicals would use is that they are saved. No one ever tells that person, listen, now that you're saved, you can do whatever you want. You can go out and just party and live it up and don't look back. Usually the follow-up is, okay, how can we disciple you and mature you as a believer? And that, for a lack of a better way of saying it, is a law, is a system of commandments and a system of direction. The assumption of which that you as a human being will fail at some of these points, which is why both Judaism and Christianity adapting for Judaism have the idea of repentance. Because we should have structures by how we live. Commandments, laws. We have it in relationships, me to my students, me to my wife. Those are all very important to how we live and structure life. And Jesus is not outside of this, right? The conversations that he's having with Pharisees is often legal conversations. Not how do we get rid of this law, but how do we live this law out properly so that we are living out the ideals of the kingdom of God.
And how do we, as good Jews, how do we disciple younger people into the faith of Judaism, which is now, crowned with the King of Jesus? But it's
precisely.
I like that, is to talk about Pharisaical discipleship. And, I always have to mention here, Jesus says you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and so you should, but not neglect the weightier matters of the law. Again, it's a hypocrisy issue there.
Yep.
And I point out, I don't know how you feel about this, but I also point out that before anything goes wrong in Eden, God commands the man saying, right? He already gives him some instructions.
That's right.
So
That's right.
There already is a positive view of guiding instructions. And then
100%.
it's also implied that the man has to improvise on those instructions, what counts and what doesn't. So there's certainly a way you can go too far. It's not clear that the Pharisees as a group are doing that. Obviously,
Mhm.
some within the group will be doing that, some will not.
Of course.
Um, okay, so when our pastor does the inevitable, sermon where he's like, now the Pharisees were these people who just made up rules to keep rules, and they do the caricatures. What's the, if we want to lovingly guide our pastor, what would be an easy way to kind of guide them to thinking like, hey, maybe Pharisees are more complicated than you're thinking?
Yeah. The first thing I would do is if I know the pastor well, I would invite them for a conversation. Let's sit down and talk. I mean, a lot of these things don't often occur in dialogue. They sometimes occur like wide on social media, which is a huge problem. You're not going to win anything on social media. Or if you start out combative in terms of, well, I know what you don't know, that's not a good place to start. So we could sit down and have a dialogue and say, well, have you ever considered this? And make it relatable to what's happening in the Gospels and bringing it back to our sacred text, then there's something significant there. I think sometimes if you are pulling to more ancient resources than you are the sacred text in a pastoral Christian environment, that's a little bit more difficult. But there's enough in the Gospels alone to have that conversation.
And if you include Acts in there, you can ask simple things like, why do you suppose Paul doesn't ever revoke his membership as a Pharisee? Like he brags about being a Pharisee late in life before he dies for the sake of Christ. Yeah.
Or the one I like also is in Acts 15 where it says there were Pharisees who came to believe.
Yeah. And then they're part of the voting on
That's right.
to tell the Gentiles, right?
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's a great one too. I'd forgotten about that one. Yeah. And so, you could, kind of politely say, boy, these Pharisees were really into Jesus's teaching and they're poking and prodding. Yep. What does that look like? Like when somebody's really into somebody's teaching, but they're poking and prodding and thinking about it, what kind of relationship is that? Yeah. That's great. That's probably really good advice for any beef we may have with our
I think
the sermon we heard. Right.
I also think the other framework that I find a little bit helpful is to understand that in Eastern ancient context, the asking of a question to an authority was the proper way of coming to that authority, that rabbi, that sage, so on and so forth. Where in the West, we develop the idea that questioning authority is disrespectful. And that there is a framework shift from the East to the West.
Yeah, I mean, I personally love it when I have a student come up after class and you can tell they want to very respectfully ask something because they're not sure they agree with me on something.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, wow, I can handle it way more direct. I love living in the New York City area like you did.
Right.
But I really respect the fact that they want to be respectful, but they really have a serious question to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Me too.
Okay, anything else we need to say about this issue of Pharisees and the public discourse of Americans? Oh, I would want to say one thing, and you can tell me how you feel about this. I think the thing with Pete Hegseth, with this maybe, it's political, so who knows what actually is going on in his mind. I think the thing that bothered me is that he didn't seem to either understand that it's anti-Semitic or care that Jews would view that as kind of a threat to them. And I think, just being humans in the world and Christians that care about our brothers and sisters in Judaism, even if I thought what he was saying is correct, I might want to be sensitive to the idea that it sounds like Christ killer to some
Sure.
That's
sure.
That has been used to persecute and kill Jews through the years.
Yep. I mean, I think, I agree 100%. I think, the other thing I've used with my students, me coming from a Puerto Rican background, you experience that sort of wholesaling of people, negatively so. So I previously when I was at Naya College and most of my students were from neighbors that I'm from, where I'm originally from, East Harlem. That conversation held weight because they understood what it would be to be marginalized and identified as one thing negatively, and basically wholesaled as a group. So then when you put it in the context of this is something that's been used to sort of wholesale the Jewish people and has had negative, horrific consequences, historically speaking, it gets picked up right away.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And while it's not the same, I feel like being a white guy, we're getting there on the marginalized wholesale negative. What do you know?
That's true.
You're a white guy.
Yeah, that's true.
Not the same, but it's getting close.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Jeffrey Garcia, thank you so much for your help and your wisdom in this.
Oh, thank you, Drew. Appreciate being here.